Hello everyone, and welcome to Gerg and Muxl, a podcast that seeks to explore the unexplored topics in games, how they work, why they work, and why we love them. I am Gerg, as
and
always.
I am Muxl.
Yep, and didn't even let me intro him.
No, he's always Gerg, though.
Yeah, it actually worked either way.
Yeah.
As always, period.
Yeah.
Yeah, just that's it. And today we are going to be doing an episode that I'm excited about. I think we kind of talked about this a little bit towards the end of the last one, or did we not tease it at all?
I don't think we teased it.
Okay, well.
Yeah, I think this is a new material.
Well, I'm going to tease you and then immediately give you what you want. Which is the only place in my life I do that.
Awkward.
The intimate eye contact Mark made, or Mark and I made when that was happening was significant. Anyway, no, we're gonna talk about, born out of discussions Mark and I have, as always, we're gonna talk about games that are so intricate or difficult that you kind of have to learn them to play them. When learning a game and playing a game are two different things.
Right.
And
when they're the same thing.
Yeah, and when they're the same thing. And as always, I think with our episodes, I would like to at least project some level of trying to not have a single right or wrong answer or label things good or bad, as much as trying to just delve into them and discover and think critically about different things. So I definitely have things that I would enjoy, or the types of games that I gravitate towards in terms of this discussion. But there's a lot of different permutations of these particular traits.
Yeah.
And a lot of people play a lot of games that have, so quote unquote, traits that I wouldn't enjoy quite as much.
Yeah.
With that. So just keep that in mind, as always, in the back of your head. There's no right or wrong way to do this. It was just a difference. It came out of thinking about fighting games and how it was actually very hard to, certain fighting games particularly, that you could very barely, I mean, you technically could, but like even playing the game at all in terms of being able to string together like a single combo or anything that would begin to feel satisfying in the game, it's actually very, very difficult to do.
Right.
And so you actually have to like go and learn the game, which is like practice. That's like the equivalent of like taking free throws.
Yeah.
In basketball.
It's not what most people are thinking of when it's like, oh, time to have fun playing a video game, right? And so I think that's why this is a good discussion to have. Is like, I think most people would think, if they hadn't played games before, like, of course, the more time you play a game, the better you'll get at it. But there are games where that is really true, and then there's games where that's not very true, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And it's interesting to, we've kind of broken it down by genre in large part, and again, we'll be making some generalizations. There's going to be a spectrum in throughout genres, and there'll be exceptions to all of these rules, but in general, these are kind of the patterns that we've seen. And I've also done this, right? I've two of the main genres where you really have to practice to get good at the game itself. To get good would be like a fighting game, or like RTSs, which are two of my favorite genres. And I've sat and practiced my reptile combos in Mortal Kombat to get to the point where I would be able to string together. And like, it was nothing even spectacular. It would just be, I'd have 3 or 4 B&Bs that I could combo into, hopefully out of a hit confirm, when I would be able to poke someone and be able to turn into it a combo, like base level stuff, right? And that took, I would like sit and practice that. And same thing with RTSs. That's like getting your build orders down for your opening and having an idea of like a map and a strategy. I would definitely practice that to be able to feel like I'd be good. Now there's a few differentiations that we'll get into, particularly the whole multiplayer single player thing is going to rear its ugly head. As it always does.
It's not that ugly.
I don't know. It's just, I feel like we talk about it a lot.
It does come up.
And it's very clear that I enjoy single-player games more, and wonder if multiplayer's ruined everything.
Oh, yeah.
Like, not just games. Like, the current...
Climate change.
Yeah, I was going to say, like, there's a lot of poverty nowadays.
Oh, gosh.
I've seen. But, I did see this today. You know how many billionaires it takes in America to make up half of the bottom half of the world's population in wealth?
10?
Yeah, 8.
Ah, okay.
All right. Close. That's insane, though. Anyway, so let's get started. I'm going to So the first, I think the one of my big bread and butters for games would be the ideal for me in a lot of ways is games that basically teach you as you play. So that the differentiation between learning the game and playing the game is almost zero.
Right.
So you're playing the game, and as you play, just naturally doing the things that the game wants you to do, that makes up the game, you just get better at it as you go. So at the end of the game, you've completed the game, and it's been fulfilling by itself, but you're also better at it at the end than you were at the beginning.
Right, and you're not super conscious of like having to get better at the skill.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And
Precisely.
I think that's like one of the main things that sets it apart from a game where you have to be like go into practice mode. It's like very clear. It's time for me to practice this.
Yep.
Whereas games where the skill and the rate at which you get better and the rate at which the difficulty increases are closer together. You aren't sort of consciously thinking like I need to get better at this skill.
Yeah, so a great example. So I was thinking just in general, like action games, like action adventure games, mostly story-based ones. So like the Arkham games, my favorite, or Uncharted is a great example. The like Shadow of Mordor games that I love so much too. Platformers are another great example because again, it's almost all mechanical there. So as you're playing, if you can't make this jump, you have to be able to so it's kind of it's a strange form of practice, right? It's not where you're outside. That's I guess that's the point. You're in the game itself, and the point of the game is to be able to make this jump. And get better and better at that.
And there's some repetition that might come through dying, or just like having to start over if you miss a jump on a platformer.
Right.
Like I was thinking when you were mentioning games of like the Mario series, like Mario 64, Mario Sunshine, Mario Odyssey, like. The levels at the end of the game and the bosses at the end of the game are objectively harder than at the beginning of the game.
Yeah.
They don't necessarily feel like much harder though. Like they might feel a little bit harder because you're like, oh, it's the final boss or whatever. But I think it's because they do such a good job at helping you get better as you play.
And that's an interesting thing too. That like this is inverted a little bit, but I would maintain actually reigns true for the Dark Souls series as well, which is the difficulty's ramped up to the point where you are going to be having all those deaths. But it is trying to teach you, and once you begin to get that skill set in place, then you'll be able to tackle. I think the difference with that is that there's no gradual ramping of the difficulty. It just throws you in the deep end at day one.
Full difficulty.
That's an interesting conversation that we maybe have some other time. But like because I wonder if a lot of times final bosses aren't more difficult. They just use all of the different pieces of the game that you haven't unlocked yet at level 1. So like if you were able to pick up a game and then if you could like beat the final boss if you're good enough. Kind of like, you can do that in Breath of the Wild, right?
Right, pretty near.
Yeah, so, but anyway, so in general, kind of the action, adventure, platformer genres seem to, like I said, in general, teach you, there's very little separation. Like, in Dark Souls, you don't, practice your skills. And it feels like a difference, too, it's a the difference between playing a bunch of soccer games, in which you're playing soccer, and getting better that way, versus, practicing a single skill that will make you better at soccer as a whole. Maybe if you had a practice mode in Dark Souls that would be able to practice against a single enemy and learn their attack patterns and do it over and over again, in this really controlled space.
Right.
You could do that, but that's also that's the game, right? And you can do that in the context of the world and the story and the unbroken narrative.
Right.
And that's the whole point, and that works really well, and it does teach you that.
And there's a lot of cool mechanics that sort of go along with that, like in Dark Souls where you can lose your souls and you have to come back and get them, and you feel like there's something on the line, and so it's more engaging for the player than I'm just in practice mode, I just had to practice rolling for 2 hours, right? You'll practice rolling if you play Dark Souls.
Yes, exactly, and there's a natural level of that being okay, and people engage with that.
And just to be clear, anybody can approach a game through the lens of I'm going to sit down and piece it apart and practice every little bit. And some people really like that, and that's how they like to learn games or learn anything.
Yeah.
I think the discussion we're having right now is whether or not that is sort of the natural way to play the game, and if you don't do that, how good at the game will you get?
Well, yeah, that's literally in the fighting game community parlance, labbing something or going to lab is a thing you have to do.
Right.
People will lab that out. That is literally so there's a literal different place where you have all the information that you need to be able to make the decisions that you have to be able to learn how to play the game.
Right.
Which is not true, like you said, in these kind of far more streamlined the action adventure games. But that's a good point. You can do that, but it's if the game encourages that. Or even requires it to be able to be able to play the game. So again, obviously, single player I think is also a far a lot easier for that marriage to happen. The other thing that I noticed that kind of threw me off because again sorry, go ahead. What were you saying?
I was just gonna say I do think it lends itself better to a more gradual progression.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Because there's no artificial everyone else being so good all at once that you have to be able to be that good or you can't play the game, right?
And you also can control like the kind of good
Yeah.
in like a single player where you can control the sorts of things the players are introduced to.
Yeah.
Because and this is a problem we've talked about before
Yeah,
with ladder systems is like people might be like as bad as you or as good as you, but they're going to be different from you.
Yeah.
And so you're going to have something to learn from everybody. And
That's deep.
It is deep, but it presents a real problem.
Are we
when
talking
it
about
comes...
games still, Mark? Are we?
No, not really. It presents a problem when it comes time to like balance and play a game. Is good. Maybe this other person like they're not very good, but they do the one thing that ruins your strategy.
Yeah.
And so like
that's annoying.
That's gonna feel like wow, they just I got owned.
You know what the worst feeling in the world is? This is obviously hyperbole, but the worst feeling in the world was when because I was like super. Particularly with RTSs, where I knew I would always pick like a middling tier faction because I didn't want to play like the super overpowered one, but I also didn't want to like I wanted to be able to win. So I wanted to but I wanted to like win well, by being better than the other team. When I would pick like my middling tier faction, and I would note that then someone else would pick like the top one, and they do a really easy like cheese strategy, and I knew it was coming, and I knew exactly what they were doing because I'd watched so many replays and I like had all this knowledge, but I couldn't stop it because I like didn't have the mechanics. I just had to watch myself lose to this bullshit that I knew how to stop but just couldn't do. That is the worst feeling on God's green earth. And RTSs usually move kind of slower, right?
Yeah.
Than like in a fighting game where you just get the crap beaten out of you and you get perfect twice in a row and the game's over.
It's like 4 minutes.
But like in an RTS you can like see it happening and like oh god, I remember games like that. That was
so livid.
That was like the closest to like rage quitting I ever got. Anyway, what were we talking about? I'm just angry. No, seriously, I'm back in like
I don't know why.
I'm back in like late middle school, early. That was like when I was super into Command and Conquer, early high school, and that's when I was like playing quote unquote competitively online, like just ladder, and I was trying to actually learn the game, and I was like, top 200 or whatever. And
well, I was mostly talking about like hard counter strategies in multiplayer games, and why that poses a problem for difficulty. But
yeah, for sure, and that's a balance thing, right? And that's the thing by itself. But anyway, so in general, those ones. Back to the learn as you play thing. The other thing that was interesting was shooters. I think in general actually do that too. Again, there's a spectrum where CS:GO is a lot more like that would be like practice-y, right? Yeah. You have to like practice your
spread patterns,
your spreads, and like your timings and all that jazz. But most shooters, I'd say in general, particularly your Call of Duties, Halo, kind of the big main multiplayer ones, is to a certain extent if you play the multiplayer a lot. You'll just get better over time. You'll learn the maps. Your aim will improve a little bit, and it's fun to play. Even when I will say jumping into a game at the very beginning can sometimes be frustrating.
Yeah.
But it really is. It is different. Again, I'll kind of hold up fighting games as the other super extreme, where like if you don't understand how to do combos, like you can't really do any. Like you can string together a couple hits or like do grabs.
Yeah, it doesn't feel very satisfying.
But it's not fun, so you eventually won't do it. So Call of Duty, at least usually, even if you're not great at the multiplayer, at least you'll be able to jump in and have some level of fun, right? And then that will be able to snowball on itself, and if you give it a little bit of learning, so on and so forth.
I do think that there's, and Greg has like a nice outline, and I just keep jumping in and wrecking it, but I think there's something to, like, games, especially games that are multiplayer, can suffer from, like, having a very experienced player base, and then when new players show up, they feel like they need to study the game. Yeah. Because while these other people just got better as they played, because everybody was like kind of that bad at the game in the beginning. Like people who've started, they played Overwatch when it started, and it felt like everyone's just getting better together. Yeah. Now if you show up and you try to play competitively, you're going to get steamrolled. Murdered. And it's going to feel like, wow, these people must have like studied the game. Yeah. I need to like go and look up stats and like practice my shooting. And maybe they do, but it's because they need to catch up to those people. Oh, totally, and that's another, like, so Overwatch is actually a decent example here, because this is just a purely, obviously, again, with multiplayer versus single-player shooters, I'd say in large parts that, but Overwatch is a good one in terms of, that is another game that one could go either way. That one's a little bit closer, where you absolutely can practice that game. But, and a lot of times, that's interesting, because you have quick play and competitive mode, right? I would never, and I was just terrified in competitive, I would only ever play the 4 characters that I knew I was at least decent at. And I would only practice in quick play when I knew there was no stakes. Right.
which meant playing all the other characters that were actually fun that I wasn't as good at. So any DPS basically. I was a tank shield, or I was a tank healer. That was it. Couldn't play. I love McCree and I can't play him. So, but no, that's an interesting thing, right? In terms of the idea of because that's a medium one, right? We're like, yeah, I would actually be practicing my DPSing in quick play, but that also was like half of the whole game, right? So I was playing the game. It wasn't like I wouldn't go into practice mode and do that. I would play against people. So it's like, okay, so you were playing Overwatch. Like, it's not just practice. That's like actually playing the game, and you're not too good at it, and maybe you'll be getting better.
Right.
But I wouldn't do that so yeah, I think, obviously, like I said before at the beginning, there is a spectrum here. And to your earlier point, what you're talking about with that's another I don't think there's any way around that problem of a player base mastering something over time, and then a new player having to jump in, other than the matchmaking system, which in theory would be able to try to send you to the people who were similar in skill to you, in a multiplayer setting anyway, right?
Yeah, I know, and I think that's true, and that's
one of the pros.
That's why matchmaking like systems exist. It's like to try to even the playing field. I think it reminds me of the fighting game community, where it's like that, but like on a community level. You know, it's like these people. For people who've been playing fighting games for like 15 years, it's like they are very good. They've also been playing for 15 years. Like it isn't just that they go home every night and just stare at stats of fighters.
Right. Yeah.
They have a lot of experience.
Yeah, that's interesting too. Like again, we're going a little bit off the rails, but like that's just a problem inherent in like games. In iterating games, right? Like, if there's only one fighting game, I don't know. Yeah, that's. I was thinking in terms of that's a half-baked idea, but like games as a service being like the new kind of like that's a model people are going towards, which hopefully is going to fail horribly, which it seems to have a little bit between Fallout 76 and Anthem's launch is not going well. In case anyone is keeping track of that, but in any case, it's an interesting problem to have. A business along with we're always talking theory and not business, right?
Yeah.
So a lot of this would be fixed without any business considerations and needing a new release every 2 years, right?
Sure. Yeah, that's true.
So, but anyway, all right. So back to our nominal structure here. But this is all good too. So this is another interesting kind of maybe third, because I've been talking about like learning versus maybe oversimplifying learning versus playing the game. Learning the game versus playing the game. There's kind of maybe a third branch here too, which is and we've talked about like knowledge, like not like practicing in game.
Yeah,
but like having to learn a lot about it outside of the game, right? So that brought us to kind of like big RPGs, right? Like you're gonna jump into Skyrim because those games don't have a whole lot of things to master, right? Like how do you practice Skyrim?
Yeah, that doesn't.
Or how do you get better? Like how do you run? Like you don't. What you do is you learn where all the good things are, what the most powerful items are, and yes, you can do that through trial and error in the game, which is probably how it's designed, but for a game of that size, a lot of people just go to the internet and get a sense of, like, not even to min-max, but, like, what are the cool things, what are the best things to go for, and how do I get them? And that's probably true of a lot of RPGs, right? Where, like, there isn't a whole ton of mastery in the mechanics. That's probably a thing, too. Like, the less mechanics there are to master. We talk about fighting games are almost entirely mechanics, right?
Right.
Or like Rocket League, for example. That game's another one you'd have to be practicing, literally.
Yes.
So things that are low on mechanics and high in knowledge, you don't have to practice. That's just a research thing.
Yeah.
So that's kind of like a third branch of these things where the more knowledge you have about Skyrim and the system of the game, which you can't really get in game, the better you'll probably be at it. But that's not a practice thing. That's more of a research thing. And to be fair, too, and like, again, with huge RPGs, maybe that's not quite doable, but in a perfect world, the game would give you access to all that information in-game somehow. So you can make all these intelligent decisions.
Right.
And I think that'd be through in-game hints, tutorials, that sort of thing.
And I think that's fine because, like, learning the game isn't the game there. Like, I would say that those games are they put a premium on experience, right? Like, you want to find the best weapons in Skyrim. Why? Because you want to be like this fantasy badass, right? With like an awesome sword. Right. And like that's the experience that you want. It's not like you want the experience of looking all over the world for a sword.
Tamriel,
Right?
Yeah.
Like,
that's a great differentiation. And I can't wait until Elder Scrolls 6 comes out and like that becomes like the new norm for like RPGs, but I don't know, it's gonna be so hard to stop using Skyrim.
that's fair.
You know,
they better come up with a really catchy name.
Yeah, hopefully it's just gonna be in the next 2028. We'll have another decade of this podcast before we have to talk about Elder Scrolls 6. But yeah, also Skyrim is so easy to say, right? It just rolls off the tongue.
Yeah, it really
better than
is.
Morrowind or Oblivion.
Yeah.
And then what's left? Somerset? No. I think that's the most recent expansion to ESO. But anyway.
So yeah, I do think that RPGs fall into an interesting category, especially because you have like levels and progression systems baked in. So
They're complex.
So you don't have to get better.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually one of the things people find faults with RPGs is like, well, I feel like, if I beat the game, did I get better? Or did I just grind high enough that like the final boss was easy?
Right.
Which is it's a good question. It's valid.
100%.
You totally can do that. You don't have to get better.
That's an interesting thing. So let's touch on MMOs there.
Okay.
For a second. I was just thinking about World of Warcraft, which is the one I have the most experience with.
Well, and that's interesting.
That's an interesting one.
Given what we've said so far, right? Like we said, things that are multiplayer are like it tends to be like you have to lab, you have to practice.
Right.
Like it's more technical.
Right.
But RPGs you don't have to do that. So I'm just to kind of frame
here.
this
Ready
discussion.
For this? Ready for this? You can blow your mind. It's not. It's literally just what I've been saying. The single player portions, the parts you can play by yourself in WoW are the first one.
Yeah.
And the parts that you have to play with other people are the second one. So raids, dungeons, the hard things that you actually have to be able to do.
Yeah.
Is that. And then a base level of being able to know your rotations in your class, and all the single player content is the first one, which is you learn.
Not
as you go.
surprising.
Yeah.
It's pretty much what you'd expect.
Well, but this is actually good because this begins getting us into the conversation of games that do both, right?
Mm-hmm.
That are large enough or that have a unique enough mode or way to play that there are literally multiple ways to play the same game.
Mm-hmm.
That can cater to different people. And that is one thing that I will say, with all the flack it gets, WoW does do pretty impressively, is cater to a massive range of, you have the people on day one that take work off and grind to max level and are doing ending game content in like the first 3 days. It's insane. Yeah. And we'll keep on doing that for the entire life of the expansion. And you have other people that are super casual, log on, maybe, see the story, get to max level, look for a mount or two.
Expansion comes out.
Yeah. Oh, and then maybe do a little bit of PvP. Like, there's a whole ton of stuff to do in WoW. There really is.
Uh-huh.
And so, hence, this discussion breaks down a little bit in terms of it depends on what you're looking for.
Right.
So games that are able to do that, again, I don't want to say are better or worse, but at least that will really appeal to a broad, and, proof is in the pudding there a little bit for WoW, right? In terms of, if you're going to appeal to a gigantic freaking audience, you better have more than one of these things to do.
Oh, yeah.
Right? The FGC is actually relatively tiny.
Right. Oh, compared
Actually, not even relative. It's tiny.
It's
just super tiny. Like, even absolutely. Like, the absolute value of the fighting game community is just small by gaming standards. Mm-hmm. Which, in our current conversation, seems to make sense, because there's a very set type of people that would be appealing to.
Yeah, that's a high barrier to entry.
Extremely.
Unfortunately, it sort of has a lockout effect of, like, because it is so small, it feels like everybody there is, like, really good and really knowledgeable.
Yeah.
Because they probably are. Otherwise, they probably wouldn't stay.
Yeah. So there's a few other games that I kind of nailed down, or at least were thinking in this terms of being both. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go back just real quick to before we got to this point. So remember this kind of like...
Okay,
we organically...
We'll put a pin in this.
We do, yeah. Well, we organically came here, so I don't want to... But at the same time, I just want to go the last one. There's another kind of subset of this, maybe outside of the current spectrum we were talking about, but where learning is the game itself.
Okay.
Which is different than, like you were saying, with Skyrim. Like, this is actually close to the RPG one a little bit. Mm-hmm. Where learning the function of the game would be a big part of it. But like you said, the experience you want isn't learning the game, it's getting the thing and then doing the thing with the thing.
Right.
Too many things there.
There's a lot of things.
It's not learning how to get the sword, it's actually having the sword using the sword
it.
in the game.
Right.
Right? So that's one thing. This is slightly differentiated in terms of, this kind of came from us playing the Arbillions, which we talked about a little bit on stream, or on the cast, I think, even.
Yeah.
As, in large part, learning how to play the game was like the game.
Right. And I actually think lots of roguelikes fall into that category of, like, learning the totality of how to respond in any situation is the game.
Yeah.
And then once you know that, once you learn the correct responses, and They Are Billions is in a very unique category.
Yes, that is
far into that category because you can pause it at any time.
Yeah.
But you can listen to our review of They Are Billions for that. But but I think lots of roguelikes fall into this category, and I am kind of reminded of Factorio, where it's like it's not really you can't pause it at any time, but like the tech tree is so massive that it's like a lot of the enjoyment from the game is just like
figuring out the
learning
right?
how all the pieces go together, because there's like I don't know if there's hundreds. There might be hundreds of pieces. I haven't counted.
Yeah.
It wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah. Oh, totally. Or like, for example, I mean, like the roguelike I'm most familiar with is Faster Than Light, which was it was actually one of the very first kickstarted things back when Kickstarter wasn't even a thing. It was a game that got kickstarted and is fantastic. Kind of, I don't know if have we ever played Faster Than Light?
We haven't played it. No.
You know of it?
I do.
Okay, yeah, it's fantastic. It's the only one I've played, and I played a ton of that game. And that's also one that you can pause in real time.
Okay.
For like any like combat is all possible. So similarly, it's far more about learning how to make decisions. It's like learning how to learn the game is the game, and then from there you just apply that over and over, and then there's a random chance element to keep it there, and then and that's it. So the experience isn't quite trying to get you to the point of feeling, obviously games have graphics and sound and all that jazz to be able to bring the experience to you. So there's some level of their abilities trying to make you feel like you're resisting a big outbreak. Sure. But the nitty gritty of the game, what the most time we spent doing it was trying to figure out the system rather than being like immersed in this zombie apocalypse fantasy, right?
Yeah.
It was not that.
It was very different than when we played Left 4 Dead.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, precisely. And that's a great example in terms of Left 4 Dead falls into the realm of being super casual, super easy to pick up, and super fun to learn and definitely get better at.
Right.
As you learn the game, and the game teaches you that pretty well if you just play through the natural story parts. So anyway, so that was kind of the. I was also gonna, speaking of Left 4 Dead, I was gonna maintain in a story sense that horror games can kind of fall into that area as well, which is learning the game as the game. If you look at it in the lens of like, I mean, even mechanically, horror games tend to be really simple mechanically, as we've talked about. We've done literally 2 whole months of horror casts.
Yes.
If you want to look at Spooktober 2018 or 17 and 18, that happened.
No shortage of that.
Nope.
Stuff.
And but yeah, a big part of horror games is particularly is being scared.
Yeah.
And once you kind of figure out what the game is doing to scare you, it begins to like similar to There Are Billions. Once we kind of feel like we figured out part of the game on how to do this, it does become less fun. It becomes less engaging.
It's similar to how in a horror game, if you figure out like how they're going to scare you or like what the pattern is, it becomes less scary, right? Because you're like, well, I knew that was coming.
Yeah, precisely. Which is a lot of the reason that you play a horror game as opposed to the, in-depth combat mechanics that are so satisfying, right? Like, there's not many games like that.
They usually intentionally ruin those in horror games.
Right. And so hence, like, a good example would be Amnesia, a game that relies heavily on atmosphere and not a whole lot of jump scares. Once you kind of figure out how far the game will go with you, it does become a lot less scary towards the end of it. But in those initial times, it's quite horrifying. So in terms of actually learning the game being the game, or the experience of figuring the game out, I think a lot of horror games would fall into that as well. And the last piece, I was going to say... Oh, sorry, go ahead. It's
a kind of a narrow experience. So there's not a lot of creativity in horror games. Yeah. We were talking about Skyrim, where it's like you want to get the sword, and then you just want to like experience being a warrior with a cool sword.
Yeah.
In horror games,
all the different things you can do with that.
There isn't really. The game doesn't open up really, right? It's to take you through usually a pretty linear experience. Yeah. Where you're going to be scared a lot, and then the game's over.
Right.
And so, like, once you know what that experience is like, there's not really much more to do with that.
There's not too much replayability in horror games by default, right? Other than, so we have, like, the Resident Evil that had a branching, like we've talked about hybrid horror games, or ones that give some choice and some branching into it.
Right.
But in large part, horror games are not known for their replayability for that reason.
Right, yeah, to the extent that they're horror games.
Yeah, precisely.
The replayability suffers.
I was going to say puzzle games are another one that we haven't really quite talked about.
That's a great,
and where they lie. Because puzzle game is, again, they're pure mechanics. They are, I think that's mostly learning the game is the game thing too, right? Yeah. You can't replay a puzzle game once you know how to solve, if you know how to solve the puzzle.
Yeah.
The game, like, or an adventure game, right? You can't replay adventure games other than just for nostalgia or for fun.
Yeah, I think a good...
How would you play a game for fun?
I think
other than for fun. That's scary.
I think a good litmus test is, like, could you, in theory, learn how to respond perfectly in every situation?
Yeah.
Like, and if you could, would it still be fun?
Yeah.
And for a game like, chess is like an easy example. Like,
Right.
if you knew how to respond perfectly in every situation, the game would not be fun and you would just win all the time, right?
Yeah.
And you could, in theory, right? I guess.
Computers,
I don't know.
I mean,
maybe you can't. But, computers can.
In theory, you can kind of do that.
Right. But in... I don't know, I'm trying to contrast that with, fighting games.
So think... Oh, okay.
Because, in a fighting game, you could... you're presented with basically an infinite number of scenarios because of you're facing other people, right?
Mm-hmm.
And so you don't know exactly what they're going to do or what their playstyle is. And there's a mental component to that, right?
Yeah.
Like, humans are inherently unpredictable and they try to figure each other out.
Mm-hmm.
And that is a lot of the sort of randomness or chaos that comes out of a fighting game.
Yeah, or fun.
Which is fun for people,
Exactly.
right?
Yeah,
Because
you
don't know what's going to happen.
Yeah.
But in a game like a puzzle game where you kind of learn all the variations and you
Mm-hmm.
kind of figure out what to do in any given situation, I would imagine that it's going to lose its fun pretty quick after
It depends on the puzzle game too. Like we're talking so obviously people do Sudoku over and over and over and over and over, right?
Yeah.
Because that's one that you can learn the type of puzzle. Like I play Infinity Loop on my phone. Have you ever seen that?
I haven't.
Okay. I'll show you that. It's clever. You have a it's not worth explaining. It's really simple though, and it's infinitely repeatable to different variations, and you can do it over and over and over, and it'll always be different. But once you figure out what to do, you'll always be able to solve them. But the very act of solving them by themselves is kind of fun.
Yeah.
As opposed to an adventure game where you have to collect these 4 things and combine them in this way, and once you know how to do that, game over, right? Something like the Talos principle, right? You could make an infinite number of those puzzles, right? I don't know if he did. Probably didn't. But.
Yeah, I don't think that there is. Yeah, I mean, we might sort of...
But even then, those were complex enough where you could replay them and not entirely remember how to do every single puzzle, right?
Mm-hmm. And this might go against a point we made earlier, but that's okay.
Hey,
I'm willing to do that.
That's what we're here for.
People enjoy being good at things, and they enjoy being competent.
Yeah.
And so, if you give somebody a game where they feel like they have mastery or they're good at this thing, somebody who's really good at a puzzle game, I could see really enjoying playing it.
Yeah.
As long as it still feels satisfying, and that's really hard to quantify.
Yeah.
I definitely can come up with puzzle games where it's okay, give people a 10-piece puzzle, right? Yeah. No one's going to feel satisfied because they're really good at putting together 10-piece puzzles.
Yeah.
But,
no, that's a good point. Yeah.
But if you make that hard enough, and they know that it's hard enough, then it does feel satisfying. Because you're this is hard, and I'm able to do it because I'm good at this.
Yeah,
and not anyone can put together a 10-piece puzzle. My 5-year-old can put this together.
Yeah. That's I think those fall a little bit outside of the realm. I think I liked what you said earlier about the kind of the litmus test of if it's something that's repeatable and able to be doing over and over and over, or again even back to our original thing, if the game itself is separate, if there's a separate mode where you would have to practice that isn't the game, as we were talking about before. And in puzzle games, that is the whole game, is being able to figure those out and doing that. There's no way to lab a puzzle. That's the puzzle, right?
Yeah, well, and you could construct a practice mode for a puzzle game. It's
interesting
that they never come with that, right? So imagine you want to set up different Tetris scenarios to know how to best respond to them.
Yeah, sure.
Right? You could imagine a mode like that, but they never exist.
Yeah.
And I think that one of the reasons is because it slows down the rate at which you are able to learn to respond to those situations, actually.
Oh yeah, and it would also be, that's not even a 1-to-1 too. You'd have to be able to recognize that scenario was happening in real time, and then be able to recall all of the practice that you did on that scenario, as well as there's potential that you would just I think that would happen naturally too if you play enough Tetris. That's part of it, is being good at it, is being able to recognize these patterns, being able to recognize I've been in this scenario before, I didn't know how to react, I'm going to try this time, that actually worked. And being able to intuitively do that over time. And Tetris is so great because it's just a perfect 1-to-1 spatial thing. It's super intuitive.
Yeah.
And it's a low enough level of spatial reasoning that most people can grasp pretty easily. And the human mind captures that and is able to process that in a way that... You can do Tetris with numbers, in an abstract number way, and it would be horrible.
Oh, yeah.
That people would not be able to do. So in any case... going back to what we were talking about previously a little bit, which was the idea of games that would begin to be big enough in either scope or scale, or have enough to do.
The WoW discussion that we had.
Yep, to be successful at having enough things that would both require you to learn them, as well as things that would require you to not learn them at all.
Yeah.
I don't think this is necessarily cross-genre either. Like, you don't have to be a hybrid game to do that, right? WoW is still very much an MMORPG in all forms of the game.
Mm-hmm.
But it has enough different things to do in that genre to be able to do that. The other one I was thinking about was, so RTSs, this is a really easy one in terms of most people that bought RTSs would play the campaign and then almost no multiplayer. Right. The numbers were staggering. StarCraft 2 is an easy one because Blizzard has such good...
metrics?
Yeah, metrics that they're able to collect through Battle.net, and it was something insane in terms of the number of people that played one multiplayer match versus 10 even was that was a 3% to 0.01% drop. It was
wow.
Maybe not that. It was those orders of magnitude. It was insane.
Yeah.
And the vast majority of people would play the campaign.
Mm-hmm.
So similarly, this is a super easy delineated one where the campaign multiplayer are two almost entirely different modes, but you do have one that requires a large amount of practice to be able to play almost at all, truly. Mm-hmm. Like in StarCraft, you could lose in the first 2 minutes every single time if you don't know what you're doing.
Mm-hmm.
And it's not fun. Versus the campaign, which does, comes right with tutorials, all this sort of thing, booklets, all that jazz. And it's super fun to play without any outside help or training.
Mm-hmm. And it teaches you how to play the game.
Yep. Oh, yeah, absolutely.
But I think it's worth saying it teaches you how to play the game in a very specific way that probably isn't competitive.
Not even close.
Not viable competitively.
That's the classic thing for a lot of RTSs that you would tell people that only play the campaign would try to do things that were good in the campaign and multiplayer, and then you just murder them.
Yeah.
Because that's not the way multiplayer worked. So anyway, all this to say, there's a broad spectrum of these two things, and certain games can do them. One that I came across when we were talking is just one I've been playing a lot of that was shocking to me in terms of I wouldn't normally think of this as a paradigm of anything really, mm-hmm. But the zombie mode in Call of Duties, which I've been playing a lot of, actually does this really well in terms of that is a mode that you can jump into with anyone. And teach them pretty darn quick and have a pretty darn good time for.
Yeah, and it's fun. It sounds lighthearted.
Yep.
You know, it's like Call of Duty, but they're zombies.
Yeah, exactly. Nazi zombies was literally the joke at the beginning. They put Nazi zombies in the game.
Right.
And it also it's a mode that you're to play over and over, even casually. You would get better at. You'd learn the map. You'd be able to get better at shooting. You'd learn where power-ups are. The game teaches you pretty darn well. You learn what the different power-ups do. You learn where the mystery boxes are. You learn what guns are good for what situations, all without looking anything up. Mm-hmm. And then you have this ludicrously complicated Easter egg hunt kind of to create all kinds of different power, like different unique weapons for different maps, like the super weapons, mm-hmm. unlocking the pack-a-punch mechanic, utilizing all kinds of weird environmental things that you would never think of. That requires a stupid amount of both practice, actually, in-game, as well as research online to be able to figure out. And again, this is an entirely contained mode that does both.
It's interesting because it sounds to me, and I haven't played this mode, it sounds like it's so hard to access that it naturally keeps out anybody who's looking to just kind of have a good time.
Oh, easy.
Which is great because it filters out people who aren't going to enjoy that experience anyway, right? Like, you don't want to have somebody who just wants to have a good time stumble into this complex machine where they don't know what to do.
Yeah, and feel overwhelmed. Even to start the very beginnings of, the quest chain to begin, completing the map, you have to do something that you would never in a million years ever do. You have to find a little rope on the side of the opening map and cut it with your knife. And that'll release a banner, and that'll start the opening quest sequence.
Interesting.
Never in a million years would I do that.
Right.
It's just a piece of, there's other... It's not even clear it's interactable.
Right. It blends in with the scenery.
Oh, easy.
And, there's zombies and stuff around. You got other stuff to do.
Yeah, so that's the thing that, like you said, I really, truly believe. And partially for the later games, it was designed around the idea of having to have the entire community come to... make it so hard to figure out that the whole community, the internet as a whole, would have to take a little bit of time. And it did. It took months for people to figure out these unbelievable... But that's, if you've ever looked into people trying to solve something on the internet and how quickly that normally goes... It's remarkable that they designed a system so complex that it took an entire community
that long,
months and months to figure out every piece of it. So yeah, a single person, and there's also nothing to suggest it exists at all, by the way. So if you didn't even know it existed, you wouldn't even know to look for it. Right. So I truly believe that someone who you just put them in front of zombies and told them nothing could probably play that indefinitely, I'd say, without
and never find these
never figure out that there was more to it other than just surviving the waves and getting the boxes.
It's just like take all the rules about making games intuitive and just break them,
Basically.
and then let the internet have fun with it.
Kind of, which is a game by itself, right?
Right.
That was part of the point. But anyway, the point of that was to say that the thing that interested me about that was that it was literally the same exact game space. It wasn't two different modes. It wasn't two different versions of the same thing. It wasn't two different difficulties.
It wasn't a cheat code.
Everyone who loads into that gets the exact same options for it, and it was so well delineated that you could do either one with the exact same amount of resources. Which I think there's a weird remarkability to that in some ways. I don't know if that's really impressive, but it feels like after this whole long discussion about how rare that seems to be, the fact that you could have something with both is really interesting. You could play it either way.
Yeah.
Without tweaking anything.
Yeah, and that like every time, like you said, every time you start the game, you have those options.
Yeah.
And there's a set of people who might not even know they have one of those options.
Yeah, so that's an interesting thing. This brings us finally to our last point.
Yes.
You want to say it?
Battle Royale.
There we go. Yeah. Our favorite topic on this cast
is Battle Royale. That's right.
It's Battle Royale o'clock on Battle Royale of Battle Royale of... I'm trying to do a date that doesn't work. The Battle Royale of Battle Royale, the year 20 Battle Royale of our Lord. Okay.
I think that we will... I know that we will actually next episode talk about Battle Royales in more detail in regarding this and other things.
Let's be kind of checking in on them, I guess.
But
they're still around.
They are. Apex Legends is becoming a really big deal. But let's talk about the scale of Battle Royales and how they fit into this whole equation of learning versus getting better.
Yeah, so this Battle Royales have continually surprised me and vexed me in terms of I don't quite understand them. But so one thing that Mark and I were talking about before the stream, or before we began casting, was that it seemed weird to me in this context for most Battle Royales that if you drop in, there's a very high entry level. If you don't know anything about it, if you just like drop in, you don't know what you're doing, you'll probably run around, collect a few things that you're not clear on what they do, and then get killed.
Right.
And then the game's over and you have to try again.
Yeah.
And there's very little learning.
You keep nothing.
Yeah, learning the game. Battle Royales don't actually teach... I don't think they teach you too well through playing. I think they teach you some things. I think you can learn some of it, but in terms of the mechanics or the strategy, certainly to win the game.
Yeah.
That you cannot... You do have to practice that or get a lot of knowledge online.
Play, talk
and then practice. So that's an interesting thing, and yet obviously they're by far the most popular genre.
Currently. Yeah.
Ever? I don't know. Like, have we ever seen numbers like that? I don't know.
It's weird because you got to talk about percentages.
Right,
and
right.
There's
and
always more people. But...
The idea of Twitch in the first place has changed things, but
but it is very popular.
Hugely popular. So and so we were talking about that, and Mark, you were describing something that you had. There's a video you'd seen, I guess.
Yeah. So
you saw the connection to what we were saying.
I got to give credit to game theorists who were discussing Battle Royale. And they were talking about how there was two really different groups of people who play Battle Royale games. They were specifically talking about Fortnite. And I think it's a great example for this. You have a group where they're most interested in getting online, finding cool items, seeing what weird map gimmicks there are, if there's any seasonal content. And then you got other people who are getting on and they want to win, they want to place well in the rankings. And amazingly, Fortnite manages to satisfy both groups of people.
And again, in the same exact game state. They're not two different modes. It's literally in this, they can all interact with each other at once.
And it's relevant to this discussion because the first group of people are, they're really learning, right? They're not trying to get better, they're not studying anything. It's extremely casual. They're literally just wanting to collect things, right?
Yeah. Looking for Easter eggs.
Yeah, looking for Easter eggs, looking to get cool items or cool characters. And then
seeing the weird stuff that, God, who does Fortnite? Like, what company?
Epic.
Oh, yeah, duh. So I've seen the stuff that Epic's putting in,
right.
Like the Rolling Cube or the Snowstorm, the Blizzard.
And I think that sort of tips Epic's hand that they know that this is the case. Yeah. And then on the other hand, you have people who, they might not necessarily be studying stats of Fortnite, but they are trying actively to get better at the game.
Oh, yeah.
And like I said, they're able to satisfy both groups of people. The people who find the items, they don't really care how long they live. The people who are trying to get better do care, But thankfully, they're able to kill people who are just running around collecting items, right?
Yeah, so fortunately, they have a practice bot built in to the game, which is these other people that are doing a thing that is entirely satisfying to them, but also entirely helps the other group of people who are trying to do the other thing. But they're
totally different groups of people,
entirely different goals, and yet everyone can play together in the same exact spot.
And they're not just like orthogonal.
Yeah,
They're like complementary.
Yeah.
Because how long do the people who are looking for loot want to live?
Mm-hmm.
Well, about as long as it takes for 100 people to collect all the loot on the map.
Right.
Which is like 5 minutes, maybe.
Right.
Probably more like 2 or 3 minutes.
Yeah.
And then they're happy to die because that map's cleaned out.
Yeah, because they want a different one. So that's a remarkable little like symbiotic relationship between, like you said, they're not just like two different things coexisting in the same spot. They're like two things that actually help each other
exist. But the two people don't even necessarily think about each other.
No. So that's a incredible. That again, from our little theory crafting perspective, that makes it a super powerful system to draw people in. As we've been talking about too, like with just the massiveness of multiplayer games and just so many people, internet being completely ubiquitous now. The more like there's no upper limit on the number of people you could get. Right. It just depends on how many people your game can apply to. And Fortnite has seen, and I would venture that's probably the reason why it won out over PUBG too, which PUBG was pretty much 100% just the get the win.
Right. Yep. Just the people who wanted to play competitively.
And like there's other things too, like Fortnite obviously has a different art style. It has a whimsy to it. It's got the building mechanic.
But pretty much everything that you list could be said, like put into the camp of the casual player.
Totally.
Right. Like less gritty graphics. It's going to tend to appeal to people who are not as hardcore.
Oh, totally. And across the board. So that's an interesting conversation that we'll go into next week with Apex Legends, because that is one, as Legends has been blowing up. I don't know if it's just because it's new. It's also Respawn Entertainment, who were the guys, they actually were the former Infinity Ward, actually, the guys that did Call of Duty for a while, and then they got bought out, and they kept the name Infinity Ward, but all that whole studio got flushed out by Activision.
Right.
And they made their own new studio, which was called Respawn. They did Titanfall 1, which was medium, but that actually was the first one that introduced wall running and sliding mechanics. So they were the first ones to revolutionize movement in shooters. And then Titanfall 2, which is considered one of the greatest commercial failures for an unbelievably critically acclaimed game.
Yeah, that's worth its own discussion.
Yep.
Because it's a fascinating story, and I like the game.
Holy crap. I played a ton of Titanfall 1, and they tried and successfully did a lot of really interesting things that I really loved. But anyway, so all this to say, Apex Legends, the same guys. Apparently the game is just absolutely fantastic, and is probably one of the best Battle Royale experiences you can have out there. But I was just reading an article today on Ars Technica, I think, talking about why the writer was still going to play Fortnite over Legends, and it was almost literally everything that you were talking about, that character, that whimsy, the idea of there are other things to be doing other than winning.
Right.
And Apex Legends doesn't have that yet.
Which is a real problem.
Yeah, exactly. Because so if we're right, then Legends might not outlast it. It might just be the new sparkly thing like a PUBG, and it will keep a dedicated player base, but won't be able to down the juggernaut, which requires both those people and probably the majority of people who are the casuals.
Yeah,
right.
And it's an engine, right? Like it fuels itself. You want to encourage the people who are there to get better, right?
Yep.
And the only way to do that is if they place top 30, top 40, right? And if you have 60 people who are in the game who are just casual, they don't care.
Yep.
Then it's easy to place 40.
Yeah. That's another good point. It's again self not fulfilling, but it's self-replicating basically. Where if you have people that don't give a crap, the people that do give a crap will always actually be getting the result that they want to a certain extent.
And they'll keep playing.
And it will enable them to keep going.
Right. Yeah. And so I think you got to have both pieces of the puzzle, not in order to be fun. Like PUBG is fun on its own. People like that game. But in order to sort of compete, I guess, with Fortnite, you've got to, if you want to play that game, you really have to have both sides of it.
Seems like it, for the scale that we're talking with Fortnite at least, which obviously is the very top end. It's not like it's funny because like even if like Apex Legends doesn't dethrone Fortnite or whatever, it's probably
very well
by its own, like by any other standard, probably be like a disgustingly successful game.
Right.
Again, that doesn't mean that it's not. But in terms of this huge, again, like the WoW thing, how WoW was able to
stay dominant and
take over entire genre.
Guild Wars did fine.
Yeah, exactly.
They didn't dethrone WoW. Eve did well.
Yep. Guild Wars got a sequel, Guild Wars 2, which also did fine.
Right.
SWTOR is able to exist for God, what, 8 years?
With all of his voiceovers.
Yeah. Oh God, BioWare, man. Those poor guys.
Well,
we'll do I really want to do an episode on Anthem because I'm so fascinated by the looter shooter thing and the absolute and utter. It's more like a train wreck thing that I can't look away from in terms of these are games I would love if they were done as single player, like Destiny, and then Anthem. I don't know if you have seen anything about Anthem. It's gorgeous and it's so cool and it looks like such a great power fantasy, and then they absolutely just neutered it.
By injecting like unnecessary multiplayer into it.
Yeah, basically. But anyway, well, hope you get.
Yeah, I mean, if we don't want to tip our hand too much about the battle royale discussion for next episode, but if you have thoughts and you want to contact us, you can email Muxl at gergandmuxl.com or gerg@gergandmuxl.com. That will get to me or Gerg respectively.
Correct.
And if you, just let us know what you think about what kind of games you enjoy playing. Do you enjoy learning? Do you while you play or studying a game? And we will see you next time. Bye, guys.